Okay, we are looking at Numbers 11, verses 4 through 17. And the title in the curriculum is God's Provision, or just Provision. And when you start reading the passage, you might think that they're talking there about the provision of manna, but this passage isn't describing the provision of manna. It's been provided for over a year. They're referring really to the last two verses in this text where God provides Moses with some help after Moses gets frustrated. However, the overall passage, to me, that's not the theme of the passage. The overall passage is discontent over God's provision, because that's what you see throughout the passage. Let me walk you through it. First three verses, which aren't technically part of our text, but they're part of the context. The people are complaining, they're discontent. In the NSV, it calls it of adversity, of their overall struggle. Verses 4 through 9, they're complaining about having to eat manna every day. They wanted meat. Verses 10 through 15, Moses is complaining about having to lead these stubborn people and having that burden on him. And then in verse 16 and 17, you see God responding to Moses' complaint with providing 70 elders to help him in leadership. So the overall theme here is really people being discontent with what God has provided or what God's calling them to do, etc. And that's really, to me, the application that you need to be really focused on as you teach this class. It really gives us a great lesson on 1 Timothy 6 and 7. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we will carry nothing out. So it's really about being content. Getting into the passage, verse 4, we see this expression, the riffraff, in the CSB translation, which your curriculum uses. The New American Standard Version, the ESV, also uses the term rabble. I just like that word, the rabble. And then the King James Version uses the term mixed multitude, which probably is the best translation as far as giving us a sense in that not only were these people of poor character, there was a mixture here of perhaps some Jews getting influenced, certainly eventually they all do, or most of them do, by those that were not Jews, most likely Egyptians. Some Egyptians came out of Egypt with them. We see that in Exodus 12, 37 through 38. It says, now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds, a large number of livestock. So we're really not given any more details, but the mixed multitude implies they're not Israelites. So it would only make sense that they're Egyptians. Maybe there's some other nationalities in there that were slaves in Egypt, we don't know, and that left with them. But the important thing here is to demonstrate and to show how a small number of discontented people can influence the entire group. So if you've got 600,000 men, and then you've got their women and children, you've got a group of anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million people, and eventually this discontent spreads to everybody. Verse 4, the sons of Israel wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? So as the New Testament says, how little leaven can leaven the whole lump. So how different the situation would have been had people just been content and spread more positive messages about God's provision. So resist the temptation to complain, because you don't want to permeate that negative attitude throughout the congregation. And as I've already said, the issue here was not that they were without food. They were just tired of the provision that God had been giving them. So just a little timeline for you. In Exodus 16, 1 through 7, this is where we see the description of God initially providing them with manna. They were 1 month out of leaving Egypt when he did that. And then this complaint, if you look just one chapter back in Numbers 10, verse 11 through 12, you see that this happens a year into the Exodus, a year into the wilderness wanderings. So Numbers 10, verse 11, now in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, the cloud was lifted from over the tabernacle of the testimony, and the sons of Israel set out on their journeys from the wilderness of Sinai. Then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran, and just one chapter later, we have this account of them being tired of the manna. So again, this isn't the initial providing of it. They wouldn't have been tired of it then. This is a year later. So basically, they were ready for a carnivore diet. Adam would not have done well with this manna every day. Just a little humor there for Adam. The fact of the matter is, though, it's not like they didn't have any meat with them already. They left with their flocks and herds. We just saw that in Exodus 12:32. They take both your flocks and herds, as you have said. Or this is a different passage, Exodus 12:32. This is Pharaoh speaking. Take both your flocks and your herds and go and bless me also. So they did have meat with them. Now, I don't know how convenient it was, especially when they were on the move. It might not have been easy for them to slaughter animals and prepare them when they were moving, but certainly they could have used and had to have used some of their flocks and herds during those 40 years. They wouldn't have wasted them and let them just die off. So they had meat, but they wanted maybe something better, something more convenient, that they didn't have to use their own animals. Certainly they might have been afraid of running out. I don't know, but God gave them manna every day to assure them they would have provision every day. And it would have certainly been something that would have been nutritious, something that would have provided them with all the nutrients they needed, and it would have tasted good. The Bible says it tasted good. Verse 8 of our passage describes, I read that passage, and you're boiling it, you're grinding it, you're making it into some kind of cake, and you're boiling it, and it almost makes me think of dumplings or deep fried biscuits. Like Mickey Four makes when he invites us to some of his special lunches. Anyways, really good stuff. Exodus 16:31 describes it as a wafer with a honey flavor. The house of Israel named it manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. So it certainly tasted good, but like anything else, you'd get tired of having the same thing every day. So a good discussion question is, what context of life do you struggle with contentment? Different contexts, right? We get tired of our job. We get discontented with our financial situation. When you think of them getting tired of having the same thing every day, I certainly see this temptation, this discontent in marriages that break down, right? They get tired of their spouse, and they are focused on all their negative things, and the flesh is always wanting more, and so people will claim to just fall out of love because they see something they think will be better. Sin, discontentment, is a form of lust. It's closely associated with it, and so this is a root area of sin. We buy a new car, a couple years down the road, it still runs great, but it's a used car. There's new stuff coming out, so we become discontent. So there's all kinds of contexts in which we see this happening in our own lives, and I wonder how God feels about it. So I think you could have a really good discussion there about that, reminding them again, godliness with contentment is great gain. If we can be more content with what God provides for us, it'll make a world of difference in our battles with selfishness and our battles with lust, etc. And we see that, lust means a strong desire. Look at verse 4. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires. I'm reading from the NESV. Greedy desires. And as I've already mentioned, God isn't giving them something that's bad or that's boring or that's bland. This isn't the wafers we eat at communion. This is something really good. Psalm 78, verse 24 and verse 25 describes it as angel's food. Then we get down to verses 10 through 15, especially verse 15, as we see Moses then hearing the people weeping. He gets angry. Verse 10 says, we see the anger of the Lord was kindled and Moses was displeased. Now, it's obvious the curriculum asks the question, why was the Lord angry? Well, that's obvious because of the people's discontent, the people's unthankfulness. But what was Moses really displeased about? It wasn't about the manna, it was about the people and the burden that put on him. Notice verse 12. Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land where you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to all this people? Verse 14, I am alone, not able to care all this people. Verse 15, so if you're going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once. If I have found favor in your sight, do not let me see my wretchedness. So pretty strong reaction by Moses as he's feeling the weight of all this. Keep in mind, he's dealing with this on a constant basis, constantly hearing their complaints. And so I think it's a really good discussion, application question for you to consider this. Have you ever considered, or do you consider enough, how your actions and attitudes affect those who shepherd you? Moses is basically their shepherd. He's their pastor. He's leading them. They're looking to him to solve all their problems, to provide them with food, to provide them with meat, to provide them in other contexts with water. And there's nothing that weighs down a pastor more than when people complain and criticize. I'm telling you, don't do that to your pastor. And certainly don't hand him a note after a service on Sunday morning, that's critical in nature. I've had that happen. It just deflates the whole day, everything you were trying to accomplish. You're trying to do things for people, and they show that kind of attitude. So I'll leave you with a couple verses that apply to that. Hebrews 13:17. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. See, Moses was doing this with grief because of the people's lack of submission and poor attitudes. 2 Corinthians 11:28, Paul, after he gets through listing all kinds of persecution and suffering that he went through, he says, apart from such external things, there is the daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. Leadership has a weight and a burden to it that you really can't understand unless you've been there, unless you're doing it or have done it. So I think that's a really important thing. And then lastly, what does God's provision of the 70 elders show us about your role in the ministry as members of a local body? Obviously, it shows us something about God as well, and his mercy and his willingness to provide help. But what is the fact that God provided others to help him? How does that apply, and what does that tell us about our responsibility in the ministry as members of a local body? So I hope this helps you in your class. I hope you have a great class, and we'll see you on Sunday.